So thank you very much. So indeed, my name is Robert Jan Gerrits. I'm what they call a technology strategist at Microsoft. And what I have in mind for this kind of half hour that I have is to take you through kind of the vision that we have at Microsoft, and actually then kind of zoom in into productivity, UC, and a specific Skype for business. So I would like to start with this kind of statement: the world is changing fast, right? And I think a lot of vendors are talking about this, a lot of people are talking about this in the market. And of course, the catalyst for the world is changing is very much the technology. However, the carrier for this change are the millennials. And it was quite interesting to hear that, also the other presenters today were talking about millennials and so on. And so for the guys that don't know millennials, or maybe more familiar with kind of Generation Y, it's the guys or the people that are born between 1980 and 2000, roughly. So are there any millennials in the room? Oh, there are. I better be careful then. So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but with regards to millennials or Generation Y people, they have actually grown up when the internet was already in place, right? So they never had this idea about having a dial-up modem, etc. They expect the internet to work, and it's all around. They also very much focused, I should say, used to actually using all kind of different devices, right? Whether it's kind of a handheld device, whether it's a laptop, an iPad, an Android device, and they kind of, expect that service or expect that device to work with all kind of services that are being offered. So what we see over the next probably 3 to 5 years, that actually the millennials are obviously coming into the workspace and are becoming the majority of the people that are in the workspace. And that's really what I want to start talking about. I have a couple of statistics here. They are kind of US-centered, so I'm going to put also some UK ones in there, just to kind of set the scene. But in the US, apparently 10,000 baby boomers are hitting retirement every day. I think that's quite enormous. I mean, if you look at apparently in the UK, it's probably around 2,000. This is actually from a specific county, and it's kind of course, an exception, but 62% of a specific county in the US will actually reach retirement age in the next 3 years. So all those organizations, you really have to start thinking about the changing workforce that you might actually have happening, start working into your organizations. And that's really where I was going to go with this, right? So millennials will enter the workplace. I hope that kind of backed it up with a couple of statistics there. In the UK, we expect roughly between 10 to 20% to kind of come into the workspace in the next 5 years. Now, as I mentioned, millennials are very mobile. They quite often don't read a newspaper, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but they rather actually use apps. They collaborate very easily using different types of social networks. I have also 2 kids, 14 and 16. One is a boy, one is a girl. But I see already between those two, how they actually use the different social networks is already quite different. So, for example, my son, the oldest one, is very happy to use Facebook, while my daughter actually never put an account on Facebook. It's not even registered with Facebook, but she's using Instagram. So even with those kind of 2 years difference, people and users are actually acting differently by using different kind of social media. So as a result, we as Microsoft believe that we have to start looking at kind of how does this kind of affect the workplace, the modern workplace, right? So I have a couple of statements here that I want to quickly take you through. So the first one, I start actually on the right-hand side, is work is what you do, no longer where you go. And I think this statement has been out there for a while, right? I mean, even 3 to 5 years ago, people were saying, you no longer have to go to kind of an office to be able to work. You should be able to work from anywhere. And I think that's still very much true today as we sit here. I think what's more important to also realize is the thing about team productivity. So in the past, individual productivity was very key. You were supposed to kind of come up with a solution, and you were kind of normally as an individual working quite hard to find that solution and come up with actually a solution to solve a specific problem that was given to you. However, over time, and I think already now we see that actually it's no longer that important that you as an individual actually solve that problem, but actually that you can solve it as a team, maybe with colleagues around the world, maybe even with other vendors around the world who have been working on the same problem. And therefore, team productivity is crucial. And that all will have actually an effect on how you start working together in the modern workplace. And kind of the third one, and then I'll go back to the left-hand side then. So if you are, trying to focus on team productivity, then co-creation and rapid integration between different users working together, different applications being used and so on, it's very important that those tools are available. So from a Microsoft perspective, we try to kind of look at this modern workplace, and that's why I kind of put this beehive in it, that if you look at those type of characteristics of the modern workplace, right, it's almost like a beehive where the different bees are working together, but not under strict control, but all with a kind of a general feeling of what actually is supposed to be happening, what's supposed to be achieving. That's why I put this beehive thing in. So there's no real, I mean, there is a queen bee, but they don't actually kind of direct everybody to say, this is what you have to do. So with Microsoft, we therefore kind of identified 5 areas that we really want to kind of approach, having those modern workplaces in mind. So the first one is about modern collaboration. And collaboration, I want to give a couple of examples here. So one of the things that we as Microsoft have been working on is something called groups in Office 365. Now before I go into this, how many of you are not familiar with Office 365? So everybody has heard of it, that's great. Anybody familiar with groups? Some of you? So well, the groups is kind of a new kind of thing we introduced in Office 365 where we allow users that want to set up, for example, a specific team to work on a specific problem to kind of behind the scenes very easily make sure that the platform is available. So in the past, if I set up a kind of a project team, I had to set up an alias for an email address. I want to set up a shared calendar, then I need to kind of define where we're going to kind of in a way store the documents. And all those the things you have to keep in mind setting up this project infrastructure in a way for the team. With groups, the idea is that you don't have to worry about that. I set up a group for, let's say, an engineering team working on, I don't know, an improvement project on the railways. And automatically in the background, it will create an alias for the email alias. It will create a kind of a shared calendar. It will create a location for storing documents. And as an end user, I don't have to worry about whether it's Exchange, whether it's SharePoint, etc., etc. So it makes it very easy to collaborate and really kind of facilitating this fact about making it easy to collaborate and integrate together. So that's the first area. The second area is modern meetings. So thinking back about those millennials, right, coming to the workspace, they are very used to kind of work from anywhere, from any type of device. So it will be quite often the case that you're trying to set up a kind of a conference call, or conference I should say, or maybe a meeting. And in the past, everybody would go to the same room, sit together and discuss this thing. But in the future, and actually already now, we see quite often we have kind of teams completely distributed over different countries, different areas, etc. So you can't really have your remote users almost like second-class citizens anymore, right? So therefore, the fact that we want to use video and make it easy to use video becomes very important in the story. So when we launched, or actually when we announced Windows 10 in January this year, one of the big announcements as well was this thing called Service Hub. And the Service Hub, for the guys who don't know, is actually a device that we've created, probably roughly either a 64-inch or an 84-type-inch display, PPI, so touch-enabled, where two people can work together on the screen and, in a way, do whiteboarding, etc., as you would expect. But inbuilt in this device, we have kind of put the Skype for Business client. So you are, for example, with 2 people kind of drawing some stuff on this whiteboard, and then automatically you would like to, for example, bring some other people into this meeting. And that's really where this Service Hub comes into play. Now, that's one example already from a Skype for Business perspective, how we try to facilitate modern meetings. The third area is modern content creation. So this is really about, again, if you're working with teams, you want to maybe work on a PowerPoint together, maybe on a Word document together. And of course, in the past, we already could do this with co-authoring of documents, right? What we also could do with Skype for Business, or Link, as it was called in the past, you could set up a meeting, you could actually share a desktop or share a document, share a desktop or maybe share a desktop to be able to kind of work on this document. What we have done now is to make those things even easier. If you want to share, for example, a specific document and you set up a Skype for Business meeting, automatically you get the right rights to actually author that document. The other way it works as well, if you started with, for example, co-authoring a document and then you want to maybe talk about this, then very quickly to be able to make this a Skype for Business meeting. So that's really kind of the third area. The fourth area is about modern mobility. And mobility in our minds is a bit about devices, but much more about the experience. And the example I normally give here is that if I'm sitting on the train and I'm using my mobile, then I forget my mobile on the train. It's really no good to me anymore. My mobile is still mobile with the train, but it doesn't really help me, right? So I rather have a mobile maybe using on the train, and when I come into the office, I maybe use my desktop there. And if I go, for example, to a remote office, I may be using my laptop. So it's really about the mobile experience being used between the different devices that I might use in different scenarios. And that's really where the modern mobility comes in from a Microsoft perspective. And then the last area that I really want to kind of announce here, or mention here, sorry, I should say, is about data and intelligence, right? So I don't know if you can read it, it's pretty small there, but in 2006 we had 0.16 zettabytes of data in the world. And a zettabyte is 1 billion terabytes. I mean, it's immense, right? And then if you talk about 2030, we had 4.4 zettabytes, and in 2020 we talk about 44 zettabytes of data. Now, what I'm trying to kind of get to is the fact that there's a lot of data around, and the Internet of Things was being mentioned already a couple of times this morning as well. A lot of data is being collected, and we're trying to make sense of all this data is not easy. And one of the things that we actually use within Office 365, if you kind of look at Office 365 as a simple service, you could say it's just actually putting Exchange, SharePoint, and Skype for Business in the cloud, and that's about it. But actually, it's much more than that, right? Because we have all those data centers. We invested as Microsoft a lot of money, a lot of effort into this, and we have this enormous calculating, computing power in the cloud. And so one of the things we can do with that computing power is to kind of start sifting through data and try to find patterns. And the first example that normally springs to mind is the thing that we call Delve and Office Graph. And again, if you are familiar with Office 365, that's kind of the concepts we're using there. And the idea with Delve and Office Graph is that we look at your patterns of the way you use your emails, we look at the way you communicate with your co-workers, and then try to kind of find some patterns in that. And the Delve will actually then provide you with a view on, hey, Robert has been communicating with Jonathan, talk about the show today, and he will actually, you can see, for example, which documents I've shared, the PowerPoint things I've been working on, and this will happen to all kind of the people I've been working with for the last couple of weeks. And so without me doing anything, and anybody looking at my profile, or maybe is interested in what I'm doing, can find all that information already kind of bubbling up automatically to them. So it's really kind of trying to create a little bit more of structure, finding patterns, and actually trying to bubble up information and stuff that is important to you. So that's kind of just give you a little bit of background on intelligence and what we are doing from Office 365 perspective, and actually trying to leverage this. Another big example, of course, is the thing about machine learning. I don't know if you have been listening to some other webinars and stuff that's coming out from Microsoft. We have, of course, this platform called Azure, and there's a lot of things about machine learning that we can do, even, for example, translation on the go, trying to translate between me as an original Dutch speaker, you probably recognize the accent a little bit, to some other type of languages, right? So this whole idea about machine learning is of course going to help us to kind of make sense of this enormous amount of data. So those are the kind of the 5 areas that Microsoft is looking at from a productivity perspective, from a UC perspective, and I've already kind of mentioned a couple of times specific examples where Skype for Business fits in. So Skype for Business. We announced Skype for Business probably roughly around this time last year, saying, we're going to call it Skype for Business, and then we launched the product in May this year, right? So we decided to say, okay, we're going to call it, we announced that we are now releasing Skype for Business. Under the hood, it's actually Link 2013 and the next release of Link 2013, right? So if you hadn't called it Skype for Business, you would have probably called it Link 2013 Release 2 or Link 2015. The fact that we use Skype for Business, the branding, has been very, very interesting for us because we had a lot of uptake, as you might have heard about in the market, because a lot of people are using Skype as a consumer. We have roughly between 300 and 350 million people worldwide using kind of Skype as kind of a platform, as a communication platform between consumers. We paid a lot of money for it a couple of years back, and a lot of people were asking, why are we spending so much money on this? And hopefully, with all the things that we're coming through these days and the announcements we are making, it starts making sense. The one thing we always have to make clear to the customers and as well as to partners is to make sure that everybody understands that Skype for Business is really a corporate UC tool, or Skype Consumer is a consumer tool. Skype Consumer is free, Skype for Business isn't free, okay? And the reason for that is because, of course, as a UC tool, you want to make sure it's enterprise grade, it's being able to support it in the proper ways with the proper support infrastructure in place, while Skype Consumer is, of course, a consumer product and is only supported through the web. So I have a couple of announcements here, like say it's full link feature set, right? So if you are familiar with the link platform at the time, Link 2010, Link 2013 and so on, then very much all those features that you were familiar with have been, of course, ported over to Skype for Business as well, because after all, it's just the next release, really. We have taken some, in a way, characteristics of the Skype Consumer. For example, the look and feel, making it more blue, using some circles around, and later on this afternoon, I'm going to give a little demo in one of the rooms upstairs. If you want to see this in action, by the way, we have a stand as well in the bigger room there with Polycom and Westcom, so have a look there as well. And you can see really kind of how it looks and feels like. The thing about Skype for Business, Skype for Consumer is, of course, also the federation side of things, right? We talk about voice, we talk about conferencing, we talk about instant messaging and presence, and it's great if you can use that internally with your own kind of employees and your own users. But it would be even better if you could actually use it with other organizations that are using a Skype for Business type of solution, whether that's Link 2010, 2030, Skype for Business. So that's kind of course, what we call federation from an organization perspective. And we can also now federate to Skype Consumer, so meaning all those 300 million people that are out there using Skype for Consumer, you can actually federate with those guys as well. And therefore, rather than just looking at it as a PBX replace or a UC solution internally, you have many more opportunities to actually leverage that system. So I'm not going to go through all the details on this slide because hopefully you have heard about Skype for Business. If you want to see it in action, I'll show it later on this afternoon. A couple of things, as I mentioned, the Skype for Consumer, the federation is working for, well, almost a year now. So we had, initially, we kind of had the federation in place for IM presence. So I could, for example, IM wants to message my kids or my family. Then in December last year, we announced that we can escalate it to video. And initially, we had kind of a workaround that you had to use a Microsoft account. For the guys that haven't really kind of heard the news, but we can actually use now any kind of Skype alias for that. So if your grandmother or your grandmother was still using kind of the original Skype alias, of course, we can now federate with those kind of IDs as well. As I said, I'm not going to dwell on this because we can, hopefully you have seen it and you can see it in action on the stands as well. So I mentioned about Service Hub being kind of a new endpoint that we announced. We also already had in place things like what we call link room systems. Obviously now going to be called Skype room systems. And the idea behind that concept was to have kind of a single SKU or a single package that allows you to use Skype for Business endpoints in a conference room. So either a single screen, dual screen with a kind of camera on top and with kind of a touch panel on the table. So when you walk into the room and you want to join a meeting, you say join the meeting and automatically you're in that meeting. So that's what we call the Skype room systems in the past. And the question from a lot of customers and partners was, what happened to that concept? Because after all, with this nice new device, Service Hub, what's going to happen with that concept? And actually, the message is Skype room system was in place. We obviously going to take this forward. Service Hub is a very nice device. It will fit certain scenarios, but not all. And actually, the whole kind of position of Skype for Skype room systems is going to be used in many more scenarios, meaning maybe having multiple screens. I'm going to talk about 1 and 2 at the moment, but maybe 2 or 3 screens with multiple cameras in the room, etc. So just to make you aware that Skype room system is not that, just the opposite. It's very much alive and taken forward. We also made the announcement that we can now do out of the box, well, I shouldn't say out of the box, but we could do direct integration between Skype for Business and, for example, the older Tamberg endpoints, if that's something that your customers and your partners have in place already. So really kind of trying to leverage your existing endpoints if that's something of interest. One other big announcement we made is the thing about meeting broadcast. So for the guys who are familiar with kind of Link and Skype for Business as a conferencing platform, we already could in the past talk about having 250 users with Office 365 in a single meeting. And if you put it on-premise, you could actually scale up to 1,000 users. And all those 250 users or 1,000 users could actually conference and collaborate together on this meeting. And they could use voice, video, desktop sharing, whiteboarding, etc. But there were certain scenarios where even the 1,000 users was not enough. For example, if you talked about town hall events or maybe where a CXO tries to talk to the rest of the organization. Those kind of scenarios happens only maybe once a quarter, maybe once every 6 months, and therefore it wouldn't make really sense to, in a way, put an infrastructure in place on-premise to cater for those kind of situations. And what we have seen is quite often the organizations were using a third party to deliver this. So one of the things that we have been working on is this thing called Skype Broadcast. And the idea really is that as a presenter, you would use Skype for Business client to be able to kind of present your desktop or present your PowerPoint presentation. But actually everybody in the audience or everybody you want to try to bring into this meeting to actually use, for example, just a browser. Whether it's on an iPad, a Windows device, an Android device, and so on. So to be able to actually see the streaming coming from this conference. And that's really what we announced with Meeting Broadcast. So that will scale up to roughly 10,000 users at the moment, but there's no real reason why it couldn't go above that. And it's obviously, as I mentioned, an Office 365 service, right? So it wouldn't make sense to put it on premise. So it's one of the services that we provide to Office 365, again, to provide different scenarios from a UC perspective. So those are kind of a couple of things that I mentioned there that we introduced with Skype for Business when we moved from Link 2013 to Skype for Business. The other big announcement that we made is that actually we are going to provide voice from the Office 365 cloud now. Up till this time, we were talking about obviously Link Online. You could put IMA Presence and you could use Link Online as an Office 365 service, and that provided you with IMA Presence, conferencing, and dial-in conferencing using what we call an ACP partner, an audio conferencing partner. Those ACP partners were like 3 in the UK, BT, Intercol, and PGI, and so you could actually use the Office 365 service as your conferencing platform if you wanted to. By actually enabling the PSTN connectivity from our Microsoft data centers, we are now giving a second option. So you could still use the ACP partners, or you could use a Microsoft service to actually provide you with the dialing capabilities to Office 365 Skype for Business meetings. Now, obviously, when we enable kind of telephony breakout from our data centers in Microsoft to the PSTN network, and allowing kind of people to dial into the conferences, then the obvious next step is to actually enable end users that are already on Office 365 to be able to make calls from the cloud as well. And that's kind of the next statements, right? So cloud enterprise voice and global PSTN connectivity is kind of a logical consequence of being able to enable the PSTN connectivity between our data centers and the PSTN network or the telephony network. So I have 2 slides to explain it a little bit further. So I mentioned kind of enterprise voice in the cloud. We actually now start talking about cloud PBX. And I just want to make clear what we as Microsoft mean with this. With cloud PBX, we really mean that all the users are in a tenant, meaning in the cloud, in an Office 365 tenant, and all the call control will actually sit in the cloud as well. In the past, we could do what we call a split domain. We could actually put some Skype for Business or Link infrastructure on premise, and we put some users in the cloud, and you could actually create a connection between those 2 scenarios. That's what we call split domain, because you use the same SIP domain, the same Robert Gerrits at Microsoft.com. And actually, depending whether you needed voice, you sit either in the cloud or on premise. So if I needed voice, I had to sit on premise. The announcement here is that all the users are expected to sit in the cloud as part of the tenant, and the cloud control, the call control sit in the cloud as well. How I then actually connect to the PSTN, there are 2 options. And that's what you see here. So the first option is you use the Microsoft service, where again we're leveraging the connectivity from our data centers to the PSTN network. And that's kind of option 1. Or the second option is that you put some on-premise equipment, either maybe a Skype for Business pool, or maybe even kind of a slim down, what we call minimal topology, that allows us to kind of connect the Skype for Business tenant in Office 365 to the on-premise equipment. And what that actually provides you then is that your users are all sitting in the cloud, all the call controls in the cloud, but you can integrate very nicely with your existing contact center solutions, maybe some existing PBX that you haven't written off yet, and so on. So in that sense, there are 2 kind of models to be able to kind of leverage this cloud PBX side of things. So what I did is it's kind of a complicated table I put together here, but I'll try to explain it, and hopefully it makes sense afterwards. So when we talked about Link Online with Office 365, we could actually provide all those different workloads, right? I talked about IMA Presence, conferencing, and actually from an enterprise voice or voice perspective, we couldn't do that because we didn't have the kind of the connectivity to the telephony network. So with the announcement of, some other stuff that I just mentioned before, that broadcast meeting, What I'm talking about, the video interrupt service, is really kind of the interoperability with Temberg device, etc. And the cloud conferencing recording is about if you want to record a conference call, then with Skype for Business or Link previously, then what you normally did is you recorded it either on your local PC or maybe on a shared network drive. The cloud conferencing recording is really about actually being able to upload it straight away into another Office 365 service called Video, which allows you then really very easily to share it with the rest of the organization. Now, the point I'm making with this is that, with kind of the new Skype for Business scenarios, we can actually cater for all those different types of features that I just mentioned. So if I start on the left column with Skype for Business on-premise user, obviously then the expectation is that all the equipment is on-premise, while in the fourth column, everybody is actually sitting in the cloud. And so what I'm trying to show you here, from a voice perspective, whether you sit fully on-premise or fully in the cloud, or do any type of hybrid scenario, voice is obviously part of this. The second column, if it says Skype for Business on-premise users with hybrid, is kind of the old hybrid scenario, the one I talked about before. That where you have some equipment on-premise, and I use some voice users that are registered with the on-premise equipment, and I have some other users sitting in the cloud that are just using I'm a President conferencing maybe. The third column is kind of the new hybrid or the cloud PBX scenario, right? Where all my users are sitting in the tenant in the cloud, and I actually break out to the PSTN through on-premise equipment or through the Microsoft services that we now provide from the cloud. So, just in closing really, so from that perspective, with regards to how do you deploy Skype for Business, is actually now left up to kind of the situation that the customers and the partners are in, right? So whether you want to stay on-premise, that's of course very fine. If you want to move all the way into the cloud, we can cater for that as well. And of course, we cater for the hybrid scenarios in between. The thing is, and I think that's what I also want to kind of get across to you guys, is we have been announcing this Office 365 with kind of the cloud PBX and kind of the voice capabilities in the cloud for the last 5 years. And so by showing you this, we actually are now delivering on this promise, right? We are providing voice as a cloud solution from Office 365. In my mind, probably for the next 3 to 5 years or maybe even longer, 90-95% will be kind of a hybrid type of solution in the sense that you might have existing PSTN connectivities in place, you might have existing contact center solution in place, and therefore you want to have some stuff that you still want to keep on premise. With the scenarios I just talked about, using kind of a hybrid approach, you can actually leverage that existing infrastructure, maybe use all the voice stuff on-premise for now, but maybe you are interested in using, for example, the broadcast meeting service I mentioned before. And therefore, a hybrid scenario where I keep my stuff on-premise to integrate maybe with my existing video infrastructure, but still want to use the broadcast service as kind of an option to use in those, those rare occasions where I need so many users to scale out to. Those are kind of hybrid scenarios that might be of interest. So this is my last slide. What we're showing here, so whether you are using moving from a conferencing perspective or from a telephony perspective, from on-premise to the cloud, hopefully with the stuff I actually showed you today, we can actually move you at the pace that you would like, or maybe stay at the pace where you are to actually integrate either from the cloud or on-premise or something in between. I'll be around later on as well, so if you have any questions, please come to the stand, and I'll hand you over back to Jonathan. Thank you.